Welcome to the Renaissance Spirit.
Posterity, the great judge of us all, to be remembered or to be forgotten. That is the eternal dilemma. Should I paint myself as a heroic figure, tirelessly striving for the betterment of Rome, or perhaps as a cunning opportunist, seizing every chance to climb the ladder of power? I know what the historians have written about me. I can see the ink drying on their scrolls even now. But let me, Titus Flavius Vespasianus, known to the world simply as Vespasian, tell you my story, not the story they want you to know, but the one I want to tell. My life, after all, is more than the sum of its victories and defeats, more than marble statues or imperial decrees. My story, like Rome itself, is one of contradictions, triumph and tragedy, wisdom and folly, iron rule, and ironic twists. Let us begin, as all stories do, at the beginning. I was born in 9 AD in a rather unremarkable village called Phalacrinae. No grandiose palaces or lofty towers greeted my entrance into the world, just a modest household far removed from the power centers of Rome. My father, Titus Flavius Sabinus, was a tax collector, a profession that neither ingratiated him with the masses nor filled our coffers to the brim. My mother, Vespasia Polla, was the daughter of a legionary. The blood of warriors and bureaucrats ran through my veins, a fitting mixture for a man who would one day sit upon the imperial throne. As a child, I was not exactly the model of precociousness. My elder brother Sabinus was always the favorite. He was everything I was not: studious, obedient, and charming. I, on the other hand, had a tendency to question everything, a trait my mother would call troublesome and my father disrespectful. I suppose you could say I had a knack for finding trouble, or perhaps trouble had a knack for finding me. My education was as much about avoiding beatings from my schoolmasters as it was about learning the great orations of Cicero or the military strategies of Caesar. But those early years, how they shaped the man I would become. My father, ever the pragmatist, would often lament, "Vespasian, if you cannot be good, then be clever." And so, clever I became. I learned quickly that in a world ruled by power and perception, one could be forgiven for almost anything if only one knew when to speak and when to remain silent. Family dinners often felt like battles themselves, with my father and brother upholding tradition and decorum while my mother and I exchanged glances filled with unspoken conspiracies. It wasn't long before I realized that the path to greatness would not be handed to me. No divine prophecy foretold my rise. No noble lineage paved the way. I was born into a family that expected me to follow in my father's footsteps, to be content with a modest life, a life defined by servitude to those of greater station. But I wanted more than a life spent in the shadow of others, more than a name that would be forgotten before it was even remembered. I desired power, not for the sake of power itself, but because it was the only way to shape a destiny that would outlast me. And so, dear traveler, let us embark on this journey together, from those humble beginnings in Phalacrinae to the grandeur of the imperial throne. A story of ambition and irony, of victories won and battles lost. A story that will challenge you to ask, was it worth it? But I get ahead of myself. For now, we must linger in the past, where the seeds of my ambition were first sown and where the die was cast long before the dice game of my life truly began. The gods have a way of laughing at the plans of men, but then perhaps it is we who provide them with the greatest entertainment. As with all great stories, mine is filled with twists and turns, betrayals and alliances, victories and near defeats. My early years were marked not by a swift ascent, but by an almost ironic reluctance to rise. When I finally left Phalakrinae, it was not to charge headlong into the annals of history, but to serve as a modest soldier, a cog in the ever-turning wheel of Rome's vast military machine. I did not have a burning desire to don a general's cloak. If anything, my aspirations were tempered by a healthy dose of skepticism, no doubt a trait inherited from my father's dealings with Rome's tax collectors. However, fate, or perhaps the whims of the gods, had other plans for me. It was during the reign of the mad emperor Caligula that I first tasted the bitter wine of Roman politics. Sent to the furthest reaches of the empire to serve in the army, I began to see the underbelly of Roman rule, the corruption, the sycophants, the power plays. Oh, Caligula, a man so unhinged, he made the gods themselves tremble with laughter, and I served quietly, watching and learning. I rose through the ranks, not because I craved glory, but because I was determined to survive, to outlast the madness that seemed to grip the very heart of Rome. My early career was, to put it mildly, a series of missteps and fortuitous recoveries. I had my differences with Otho, who ended up taking his own life instead of being felled by my sword. An ironic twist, considering he later became emperor himself, only to meet a similarly unfortunate fate. Oh, the irony of Roman politics, where friends are foes and enemies sometimes save your life. And then came the year 41 AD, the year that saw Caligula fall to his own hubris. Enter Claudius, the bumbling scholar turned emperor. Under Claudius, I found my footing, earning favor through a series of military victories that, quite frankly, had more to do with luck than skill. Yet it was in Britain, of all places, that I made a name for myself. I was sent there to quell a rebellion and bring the unruly tribes to heal Britannia, a cold, damp island filled with barbarians who wore nothing but woad and a bad attitude. Still, I managed to win a few battles, secure a few victories, and in the process, caught the eye of the imperial court. I was no longer just Vespasian, the son of a tax collector. I was Vespasian, the general, the man who had brought Britannia to her knees. I returned to Rome a hero, much to my own surprise. But then came Nero, the golden boy, with a penchant for playing the lyre while Rome burned. Nero, who saw himself as a god, but behaved more like a spoiled child. Nero, under whom I served not out of loyalty, but out of necessity. It was a dangerous time to be a Roman general. Trust was a currency in short supply, and treachery was the coin of the realm. I was sent to Judea to crush a rebellion, a task that seemed more punishment than promotion. The Jews were fierce fighters, and their land was as unforgiving as their resolve. But I did what was asked of me and more. I built a reputation not just as a soldier, but as a man who could be relied upon, a man who could be trusted, even if I trusted no one in return. And then, in 68 AD, the world as we knew it crumbled. Nero was dead, the victim of his own excesses and enemies. The empire was plunged into chaos. The year of the four emperors, they called it. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, each claiming the throne, each falling in turn. I watched, I waited, I plotted, and when the time was right, I made my move. Not because I was the strongest or the smartest, but because I was the most patient. I knew when to strike, and I struck hard. And so, in 69 AD, the Senate proclaimed me emperor. Me, Vespasian, the reluctant general, the unassuming politician, the man who had never sought power, yet found it thrust upon him like a laurel crown on a reluctant brow. But make no mistake, once I had that crown, I had no intention of giving it up. I had seen too much, survived too much, to let it slip away so easily. I had come too far to turn back now. But what kind of emperor would I be? Would I follow in the footsteps of my predecessors, or would I forge a new path? The answer, as always, lay in the balance between power and irony, between destiny and desire. And so we move to the heart of my reign, where the real drama unfolds, where the real tests of character lie. What did I do with the power I had fought so hard to obtain? But that is a tale for another time. A tale of reforms and rivalries, of triumphs and treacheries. Stay with me, dear traveler, as we journey from the blood-soaked sands of Judea to the marble halls of Rome, where the stakes were higher and the price of failure was death. The throne. I had finally grasped it, but the real challenge lay in holding onto it. Rome was a beast with many heads. One moment it could offer you the laurels of victory, and the next it could devour you whole. The emperors who came before me learned this lesson all too well. Nero, that impetuous artist of destruction, left Rome in ruins both literally and figuratively. His reign had been a grotesque theater of excess and cruelty, where even the gods themselves seemed to turn away in disgust. And yet, as the first emperor of a new dynasty, it fell to me to pick up the pieces and breathe new life into this fractured empire. But how does one rebuild an empire on the ashes of madness? How does one restore dignity to a throne tarnished by the caprices of its previous occupants? I had to be everything Nero was not steady, where he was erratic, frugal, where he was lavish, sensible, where he was theatrical. I was no golden child, no artist king serenading the garden. I was a soldier, a pragmatist, a man of the people, or at least that's what I wanted them to believe. I had seen enough of the world to know that power was not a gift, it was a test. And the test was just beginning. My first order of business was to bring Rome's finances back from the brink of ruin. Nero, in his infinite wisdom, had nearly bankrupted the state with his endless festivals and grandiose building projects. Rome needed money urgently, and so I taxed everything that could be taxed and some things that couldn't. Wine, grain, olive oil, even urine from the public latrines, if it moved, I taxed it. Some called it desperate, I called it necessary. Money does not stink, I famously quipped when questioned about my methods. A bit crude perhaps, but then I was no stranger to irony. Of course, I also set about restoring Rome's infrastructure, repairing roads, aqueducts, and the much-needed public buildings that Nero had neglected. The people needed bread and circuses, yes, but they also needed a functioning city in which to live. And so I began to restore the dignity that Nero had so carelessly discarded. I established the Colosseum, a project meant to remind the people that the Flavian dynasty was different, that we were builders, not destroyers. Oh, the Colosseum, how it would echo with the roars of the crowd, the cries of the gladiators, the baying of wild beasts, a monument to my reign, a monument to Rome's eternal thirst for spectacle. But while I set about the task of rebuilding Rome, I also had to deal with the ghosts of my predecessors. The shadow of Nero loomed large over my reign, his conspirators, his loyalists, and even his cult of personality. Some said that Nero would return, that he would rise from the ashes like some twisted phoenix. I had to tread carefully to strike a balance between suppression and appeasement. I could not allow his specter to haunt my rule, nor could I afford to alienate his still numerous supporters. And then there were the legions. The legions, Rome's true power brokers. It was the soldiers who had put me on the throne, and it would be the soldiers who could just as easily take it away. I knew I had to keep them loyal, to keep them invested in the success of my reign. So I granted them land, paid their back wages, and reformed their ranks. I gave them what they had been denied for so long: respect and recognition. They were the backbone of my rule, and I made sure they knew it. Despite my efforts, not all was well. There were murmurs of discontent, whispers of rebellion. Some accused me of being too harsh, too severe. But what did they expect? I had inherited a mess, and I was not about to let the empire slip back into chaos. I ruled with an iron fist, yes, but it was a necessary iron fist. Rome had been burned too many times before. I had no intention of letting it burn again. But therein lay the irony, didn't it? I had risen to power as a man of the people, a humble general who had served his time in the trenches, only to find myself ruling as an autocrat, harsh, unyielding, uncompromising. Was this what I had fought for? Was this the destiny I had dreamed of in those distant fields of Britannia? Or was I merely a product of my times, a necessary evil to counteract the evils of those who had come before me? But that is the question, isn't it? What kind of ruler was I really? A reformer or a pretender? A savior of Rome, or just another tyrant in a long line of tyrants? Only time, and perhaps you, my dear traveler, will decide. But for now, let us leave that question hanging in the air, like the sword of Damocles, ever poised to strike. For the end was nearer than I thought, and the gods were preparing to write the final chapter of my life, a chapter filled with as much irony and contradiction as those that came before. And so the story winds down, as all stories must. Every emperor knows his reign is but a brief flicker in the grand tapestry of Rome. I had ruled for a decade, 10 years of navigating the treacherous waters of politics and power, 10 years of trying to keep this sprawling empire from tearing itself apart. But no emperor, no matter how shrewd or determined, can escape the clutches of time. And so, in the summer of 79 AD, as the oppressive heat of Rome bore down upon me, I began to feel the weight of my years more keenly than ever. It started with a dull pain in my stomach, a discomfort I dismissed at first as the price of too many banquets, too much wine, and perhaps a few too many hours in the scorching Roman sun. But the pain grew worse, gnawing at me like some insidious beast. I knew, of course, what this meant. I had seen enough of life to recognize the signs. My body was betraying me, just as I had seen it betray countless soldiers on the battlefield, countless citizens in the city. The gods, it seemed, were preparing to collect their final tribute from me. I withdrew to the countryside, to the peaceful surroundings of my villa in Reate. There, amidst the rolling hills and the tranquil olive groves, I tried to ignore the inevitable. I still had matters of state to attend to, letters to write, orders to give, taxes to levy. I was still emperor, after all, even if my body had other ideas. But as the days wore on, it became harder and harder to maintain the illusion of control. My strength waned, my body grew weaker, and my mind began to drift first to my family, to my sons Titus and Domitian, who would inherit this heavy crown, and then to my legacy. Titus, my eldest, my heir. He had always been the apple of my eye, the golden child who could do no wrong. I had groomed him to be my successor, to continue the Flavian line, and Domitian, my younger son, more cunning, more ambitious, perhaps more dangerous. I worried for them both, as any father would. Would they live up to the expectations I had set? Would they learn from my successes and, more importantly, from my failures? Would they understand the delicate dance of power and governance? I could only hope. I could feel the end approaching, like the distant rumble of a storm on the horizon. My advisors and physicians hovered around me, their faces grim, their whispers hushed. They tried to comfort me, but I was beyond comfort. I had seen death too many times to fear it now, and so I resolved to meet it as I had met every challenge in my life, head on, with a wry smile and a healthy dose of sarcasm. And then the moment came. I could feel my body giving out, my breath growing shallow, my vision blurring. The gods, those fickle beings who had watched over me all these years, were finally calling me to account. Vai puto Deus fio, I muttered, a fitting final jest. Oh dear, I think I'm becoming a god. A joke, you see, because that's what emperors became when they died. Gods. Rather ironic twist, given that I'd spent my life trying to keep my feet firmly planted on the ground, and with that I let go. The world around me faded into darkness, and the great drama of my life came to a close. The stage was set for the next act, for the next emperor, for the next chapter in Rome's ever-unfolding story. My time was over, but Rome, as always, would endure. It was not the end of the empire, just the end of me. And perhaps, in the grand scheme of things, that was as it should be. But even in death, I was not finished. No, my legacy would live on, for better or worse. The Flavian dynasty would continue, and Rome would march forward, ever onward, ever upward. But the question remained, what would the future think of Vespasian, the man who had clawed his way to the top, who had rebuilt Rome, who had ruled with both an iron fist and a wry smile? Only time would tell. But that, dear traveler, is a story for another day. For now, let us linger a while longer on the cusp of history, on the edge of eternity where life and death, power and irony collide in one final, fateful dance. And as the curtain falls, let us ponder what it all meant and whether in the end it was worth it at all. Legacy, the cruelest joke of them all. What we leave behind, they say, is how we are remembered. And what we are remembered for, that's an entirely different matter. You see, I did not build the Colosseum or restore Rome's finances simply to be adored by future generations. I did it because it needed to be done, because Rome needed stability, structure, and above all, a firm hand to guide it through the chaos of its own making. But how would I be remembered? As a reformer? A dictator? A miser who taxed everything under the sun, even the very air Romans breathed? Or perhaps simply as a man who dared to rule in an age of madness? History, as it turns out, is not kind to those who seek clarity. My successors, starting with my son Titus, would learn this well enough. Titus, the darling of Rome, the man who would become known as the delight of mankind, he was everything I was not: charming, graceful, and beloved by the people. He would go on to handle crises with a deft touch, dealing with the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and a devastating fire in Rome itself. But his reign was brief, too brief, and it was Domitian, my younger son, who would ultimately take the throne. Domitian, now there was a conundrum. Ambitious, clever, and ruthless, more of a mirror of myself than I'd care to admit, but lacking perhaps in my subtlety, my restraint. His reign would turn Rome against the Flavians, plunging the empire back into a darkness I had fought so hard to dispel. But that is the way of things, isn't it? We build, we strive, we sweat and bleed to create something lasting, and then almost inevitably, it crumbles into dust. The Colosseum still stands, a monument to the grandeur of Rome, yes, but also to its excesses, its cruelties, a place where men and beasts fought and died for sport, for spectacle, for the amusement of the masses. Was this the legacy I intended to leave behind? I wanted to build, to restore, to give Rome back its dignity, its sense of purpose, and yet I could not escape the shadows of those who came before me, nor the darkness of those who would follow. And what of my reforms? I had stabilized the empire's finances, yes, but at what cost? My taxes filled the coffers, but they also emptied the pockets of the people. I restored order to the provinces, but sometimes through the harshest of means. I rebuilt Rome, but I also built prisons for those who dared oppose me. Was this the price of progress? Was this the true cost of stability? Perhaps. Or perhaps it is simply the nature of power, a nature that remains unchanged through the centuries. Power is not a gentle hand. It is a fist, clenched tight, holding onto whatever it can. It is a constant balancing act between the needs of the many and the desires of the few, between the reality of rule and the ideal of governance. I did what I had to do, what I believed was necessary to keep Rome strong, to keep her united, and if I am judged harshly for it, so be it. Better to be remembered as a ruler who did what was needed than as one who did nothing at all. But that brings us to the final question, does it not? Was it all worth it? Was my reign, my life worth the price that was paid? But that is the question every emperor must ask himself in the end. The answer, as always, is not so simple. Yes, I brought stability to Rome. Yes, I rebuilt a city left in ruins. But I also laid the foundations for what would come next, for the excesses of Domitian, for the iron rule that would follow. I saved Rome, perhaps, but did I also doom her to the very fate I sought to avoid? Let's answer that question in our next chapter. Only time, that relentless judge, will decide. But I will say this. In my reign, I sought to bring about a sense of equality, a sense of justice, even if it meant using the blunt instruments of power to achieve it. I believed in the value of freedom, of liberty, even if I had to curtail it to maintain order. I knew that democracy, that great ideal, was beyond the reach of Roman Empire, too vast, too complex to be ruled by the many. And yet, I tried to bring a sense of fairness, of balance, to the governance of the state. Was it enough? I do not know, but I tried, and in the end, perhaps, that is the most any of us can say. And now, as we stand here, on the precipice of the past, looking back over the vast expanse of history, I invite you, dear traveler, to come and see for yourself. Walk the ruins of Rome, where the ghosts of emperors still linger. Visit the Colosseum. Feel the echoes of the past in its ancient stones. Hold a Roman coin in your hand, a relic of a time when the world was both simpler and far more complex. And as you do, remember this: history is not just the story of emperors and empires, it is the story of all of us, of our hopes, our dreams, our fears, and our failures. It is a story still being written, a story that we all have a part in telling. So let me leave you with this thought, this final reflection from an emperor who has seen it all, who has lived it all, who has done it all. Thank you for watching, for listening, for reading. Our channel, Renaissance Spirit, is dedicated to the pursuit of a just, equitable, and humanitarian world. We explore the depths of history, politics, religion, and culture, drawing lessons from the past to better understand our present and shape our future. We are here to learn, to grow, to become better stewards of this world we all share. The Renaissance was a time of rebirth, of new ideas, of fresh thinking, a golden age that gave birth to the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. Let us embrace that spirit, that Renaissance spirit, as we continue to explore the mysteries of our past and the possibilities of our future. So, subscribe, turn on those notifications, share with friends and fellow seekers of knowledge, explore the other videos on this channel, take the quiz to see if you have the Renaissance spirit, and let me know in the comments what you think, what you've learned, and what you'd like to see next. History has not died. It lives on in us, in our understanding, in our curiosity, in our never-ending quest for truth. So embrace it, learn from it, and above all, let it inspire you to be better, to do better, to think more deeply, and live more fully. Vive Renaissance Spiritus! History is alive and it is waiting for you.